So, it's no secret there are people on the internet these days who think modern art is valueless. They contrast a more realistic style like the Renaissance painting to something like a Jackson Pollock and say this is indicative of a decline in art's quality. Now, I'm not going to say this is necessarily a bad faith argument rooted in the myth of classical Western superiority, though it is coming from PragerU, so... But I think we can all agree this argument is, at the very least, missing something. It's just an extremely limiting way to look at art, like the closer something is to a photograph, the better it is automatically. It doesn't allow for things like abstraction or impression or style. Sometimes something that's less realistic has a better emotional impact on its subject, sometimes for exactly that reason. And yet, it's not only right-wing think tanks putting out this idea that realism is the highest ideal. We're seeing it all over these days. YouTube, Tom Hooper, Disney. What's up with realism? Is realism even anything? Let's talk about it. So, I'll start pretty basic. What does it even mean when storytellers are critiqued for being, quote, unrealistic? In a very general sense, people who say that usually mean some aspect of the story felt fake, felt constructed in a way that broke their immersion by reminding them they were in a work of fiction. For example, unrealistic dialogue like this.
The thought of not being with you. I can't breathe.
Breaks our immersion because that's not how people talk. It reminds us that this isn't a real conversation, only an imitation that was scripted beforehand, precisely because it's a bad imitation. Take a look at this art from medieval Europe. This is actually a reflection of a culture with a different kind of artistic standards, because paintings in medieval Europe were mostly produced for religious purposes rather than aesthetic ones. So it doesn't really matter if it's good, so long as you can tell that's Mary and that's Jesus. We look at these now and feel they're not very good paintings because nothing about them evokes for us an image of what people really look like. Though I don't want to cast aspersions on an entire 1,000 years worth of artists, generally speaking, in the modern day, this kind of immersion-breaking unrealism is thought to be a hallmark of laziness. Like you wanted to communicate something to your audience, but you didn't want to have to go through the work of making it feel organic. As long as people could understand what was being represented, that was enough. This kind of critique can go too far, though. We're all humans here, we've all had conversations, so we all basically know what real dialogue sounds like and can pick out when it sounds fake. But there's also a geology expert out there who can just as easily point out that Tolkien's mountain placement on his Middle-earth map isn't reflective of where real mountains would go. His mountains are unrealistic. But do any of us really care about that? Do we think Tolkien's breach of realism there really negatively impacts the quality of Lord of the Rings? Probably not. And a lot of fact-checking based critique on platforms like YouTube concerns itself with things that absolutely don't matter. It can feel fun to engage in this form of nitpicking in order to feel smart, but most of us would probably agree it's a crap way to analyze media for quality. And also, what if a piece of media's unrealism isn't just laziness? What if you make your representation wider of the mark on purpose in order to accomplish something else? What if, for instance, you write a play where everyone speaks in blank verse or rhyming couplets? Or produce a movie where all the images are represented by two-dimensional drawings? Or direct a show where people will sometimes spontaneously burst into song and dance? That's all pretty unrealistic, but I think most people would say there's a world of difference between this...
You are lying! I never hit you! You are tearing me apart, Lisa!
And this.
It wasn't until later, when I was washing the blood off my hands, I even knew they were dead. They had it coming!
The difference here is that this is not simply some haphazard approximation of reality. The distortion made by animation or music are done with artistry and skill, at least in theory. An audience will generally go along with this distortion rather than feeling distanced by it because it enhances the quality of the art in other ways. This is what we call suspension of disbelief. You choose to ignore unrealism because you're enjoying the media. But not everyone seems to see that nowadays. I'm a big fan of the musical Les Miserables, but I'm not a big fan of what they did with it in 2012. Though there were many parts of the movie I did like, I liked how they included stuff from the book that the musical cut for time, for instance, that wasn't enough to overshadow the movie's major problem. Not the singing, but rather... well, the lack of singing.
I do the soliloquy and it starts with, "What have I done, sweet Jesus, what have I done? Become a thief in the night, become a dog on the run." I can go out there and some takes I'd be like, "What have I done? Sweet Jesus, what have I done? Become a thief in the night? Become a dog on the run? I can speed it up, I can slow it down, which means I just have to worry about acting.
So, this clip actually gets me kind of mad. Jackman is talking here about Valjean's soliloquy, which might be my favorite part of the show. It's a representation of a seismic shift for our protagonists, him exchanging 19 years of misery and bitterness and shame for hope in a new life he can start leading. It's a song that starts low and fast and tense, with Valjean stuck on this one single note, and then it goes through all these conflicting melodic motifs as Valjean struggles with himself, and then it ends on this bombastic, beautiful series of high notes as he vows to write himself a new story. It is high emotion, and I rarely see it performed without crying. It's also, as far as a reaction to the situation Valjean finds himself in, fairly unrealistic. I mean, you steal from a bishop who offers you your freedom anyway, and then you just go into a room and start singing about it? How illogical. So Tom Hooper decided he needed to fix that. He told Hugh Jackman, apparently, that he didn't have to sing on tempo or even sing at all, he could just speak the lyrics, leading to this.
What have I done, sweet Jesus? What have I done? Become a thief in the night, become a dog on the run.
And hey, this is more realistic, sure. It's more like Valjean is talking to himself as he tries to process what just happened, and most people don't express themselves in such a moment with perfect rhythm or pitch. But Tom, Valjean's soliloquy, I don't know if you knew this, is a song. It's a song. It's music. Why do you need it to be more realistic? Why do you need it to sound like a speech? It isn't one. It's an abstract representation of your protagonist's mental state through the language of melody and rhythm. There are some people who don't like musicals because that method of storytelling just doesn't really do it for them, and that's fine. But I promise you, Tom, those kinds of people did not come to watch this film. You know why? Because this film is a musical! Yet here we have demonstrated this idea of realism being the end-all be-all in a movie's quality. In the name of realism, we've made all these songs worse, and this is somehow an improvement. And of course, Les Mis walked in this department so a certain 2019 movie could run. Tom Hooper says of Cats, "I wanted to keep it very grounded in the present moment. The thing I'm most proud of is that you feel grounded watching it. It's not that fantastical." Which, okay.
We don't have time to unpack all of that.
I don't have time to unpack all of Cats 2019. I already spent too long on Valjean's soliloquy. The only thing I'll say here is, even if that were true, that it feels grounded, and to be clear, it isn't, why do you say that like it's a good thing? Who do you think wanted a grounded-feeling version of Cats? What fan of Cats did you know who said, yeah, I love the musical Cats? This musical, Cats, but I'd like it even better if it was super realistic. Why did you think realism was going to make Cats better? Well, maybe hyper-realistic CGI is just having a moment right now. Ah, the live-action Disney remakes. So many things I could say about them. The nonsensical additions to their plots, the attempts to over-explain things that only CinemaSins was ever mad about in the first place, the auto-tune. But right now, let's focus on the existence of live-action remakes as a concept. Generally held wisdom is that when you remake a movie, you're doing it because you either want to put a new spin on it or update it with better visuals and modern technology. Now, the Disney remakes, with a few exceptions, are not new spins on their source material so much as just sing-alongs of it, so the rationale here must be we're updating these movies with better visuals. This Lion King has better visuals than this one because the animation is super realistic instead of stylized and cartoony. But that's complete bullshit. It's again a refusal to acknowledge that sometimes unrealism is purposeful and in service to something. I'm hardly the first to point out that the 2D animated Lion King is way more expressive, contains way more fun visuals and personality in its setting and its characters, and generally gets across its story way better visually than the 3D animated one, precisely because it's not bound by so many concerns about realism. Can we please just stop this? Have I made my case yet? Have I successfully proved that realism is bullshit? Can we stop this? Well, here's the thing. Realism is not actually bullshit. Not completely. Even putting aside the basic fact that artless unrealism definitely can harm a piece of media's quality, let me say this. I have a very young cousin, And the last time I visited her, she informed me that there were 2 Lion Kings, an old one and a new one. So I asked her which one she liked better, and she said the new one because it's real life. And yeah, I'm sure this 6-year-old has probably already been steeped some in a culture that overvalues photorealism, and that's rubbed off on her a bit, but my cousin's a smart girl. She likes what she likes for a reason. Photorealism is not worthless as a method for judging art. The fact that animators were able to create this level of realism for Lion King, like, granted, the shots don't look as pretty as the originals, but this absolutely looks like a real living, breathing lion right here. That's crazy impressive. I think there's an essential kind of aesthetic pleasure that comes from being legitimately fooled by an imitation. And I do think that's a large part of why realism is so all the rage right now. New technology is allowing art to completely imitate reality in never-before-seen ways. It's not just trolls who like to nitpick things that are contributing to this trend. There's a lot of art and media production that's just working to push the boundaries of what non-real media, representative art, fiction, etc. can do. To be honest, I think that's kind of cool, even if it does sometimes backfire into uncanny valley abominations. I have nothing against realism, really. It's a tool of art that can be used, misused, or neglected to good or bad results. What I really want to emphasize here is that unrealism is not necessarily a bad thing. There is no such thing as objective artistic standards, no matter what an evil oil exec in a blue void might tell you. Art and media can thrive without any realism at all. The weirdest and craziest shit can be the best. Just let it happen. Let art be what it wants. That's my take.